We're joined today by economist Richard Wolff. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts. And the topic today, I guess broadly speaking, is European economies. Professor Wolff, I was in Europe a few weeks ago, as I told you about. And of course, every time I visit, I am struck by the contrast in terms of the attitude towards work that exists in Europe, a vacation time and the importance of time off taken so much more seriously than it is in the US and understood as important. But also I was interested in some of the European economies, particularly that of Switzerland, where the sticker shock upon arriving, stepping off the plane and seeing that any cheeseburger is $30 was amazing. But in researching more about the economy in Switzerland, as a place that has retained its own currency, the Swiss franc, is not part of the EU, but does have numerous treaties with the EU. I'm interested in thinking of, we hear colloquially that Switzerland is doing very well. In what way do we see that reflected, and how can we judge whether an economy is doing well or not?
Well, the standard way that we judge, which isn't, by the way, very good, but the standard way is by looking at things like the GDP, the total output of goods and services as they are conventionally measured by both governmental and international agencies. Sometimes the total output divided by the number of citizens, GDP per capita. What is it? How does it compare to other countries? Has it been growing or has it been stagnating in recent years? Those are usually the ways in which we get a broad, quick sense of how an economy is doing. The problem with that is it can give you a very bad misimpression. Let me give you an example. If the incomes of the top 10% of a country like Switzerland or any country, if the incomes of the top 10% are soaring, but the incomes of everybody else are stagnating, the average will show an increase. It's the old joke in economics. If you have 10 people, one of whom is a multimillionaire with $10 million, and the other 9 have nothing at all, the average wealth of this community of 10 is $1 million a person. I mean, that's true, that is the average, but it surely does not give you an accurate sense of what's going on. Switzerland, like other countries, but it's particularly clear in Switzerland, is a society in which the folks at the top, and that means mostly the folks who have to do with Switzerland's most important industry, which is finance, banking, and everything having to do with finance, those people have been doing very, very well, but they have gotten further and further distant from the average Swiss citizen, so that Switzerland, like many other European countries, is in fact caught in a growing inequality that is probably much more, gives you a much clearer understanding of what's going on there than looking at GDP numbers.
So let's contextualize that a little bit, because in my research, it turns out that many waiters, waitresses, people working in kitchens and restaurants in Switzerland often making 20, 25, or even more US dollars equivalent per hour. And we often hear in the US from the American right that, hey, if you raise minimum wages, everything gets very, very expensive. And sometimes they will point to Switzerland. They would say, look at what's going on in Switzerland. Great economy. Switzerland's doing so well, but cheeseburgers all cost $30, and they connect it to the high wages that even those presumably at the bottom of the earning brackets earn. Is that a fair assessment, or is that ignoring some important facts?
Well, I think there's an economic misunderstanding that comes from the American right wing. I'm being polite, and I'm using the word misunderstanding. What I really think is it's ideological pleading, and it's bad economics. Whether or not the price of a product is raised does not depend on the wages you pay your worker. It might be nice for a businessman or woman to be able to think that if the wages they have to pay workers go up, they can simply recoup that money by jacking up the price. But that never is true. And the reason for that is very simple. Many, many factors go into determining at what price you can profitably sell what you produce. You may want to raise the price for any one of a dozen reasons, but that wanting is a long way from being able to do it. Often a business will face a higher price for workers' wages, or for the price of electricity, or for the costs of their material inputs, or for the rentals they pay for their space. But that fee, that extra cost they have to pay, is something without which they can't continue to function. It's a completely different matter. Can they raise the price? It may well be that there's not enough market out there for them to be able to do that. And therefore, this notion that if you have a higher cost of wages, then you will have a higher prices simply isn't true. It makes no sense economically, and there's no historical record to show that.
Could it work in reverse in this sense, in that all business owners would love to raise prices, and it just so happens that in Switzerland, the market is able to bear that increase because even waitresses and cooks are making $20 to $30 an hour?
I'd adjust the answer. Short answer is yes, but let me adjust it slightly. The reason it's more often true in reverse is equally easy to understand in economics. If you have a general increase in prices, because companies across the board, well, not everyone, but most of them, think that they can sell as much or more than they did in the past while raising their prices, well, then we know what you learn in business school is if you can get away with raising your prices without losing customers, well, then you do it. If a lot of businesses do it, and therefore we have an inflation, that is a general rise in prices, one of the first things you can be quite sure will happen is that workers, having to pay now these higher prices, will be putting more pressure on their employers to raise their wages. But again, the economics tells us whether or not workers who want to have higher wages so they can pay the higher prices will be able actually to get the higher wages. That depends on all the factors that shape the relations between employers and employees. But there's no automatic mechanism that translates the one into the other. Employers like to claim, oh, I raised the price not because I want to make more profit from my customers. That wouldn't be considered good PR. So they prefer to say, I raised my prices because I had to, because my workers, damn them, forced me to. This is a little bit of a game, and people shouldn't be taken in.
Very quickly, in the last bit of time we have left, we also saw in Switzerland, they passed a vote, essentially a quota system on immigration, which some would argue conflicts with the goals and their treaty with the European Union, which is a free movement of labor as well as residents. We also saw the proposal, which did not yet, I don't remember if it didn't yet pass or if it failed, regarding the basic income in Switzerland. There's this very interesting kind of confluence in Switzerland of seemingly very progressive ideas that are being proposed, but also ideas that are more akin to some right-wingers in the U.S. wanting to limit immigration, for example. How can we characterize in general the direction that Switzerland is going?
Well, I think both the progressive and the more and less progressive dimensions you talk about have the root in the same place. Switzerland, like so many other countries, is becoming divided between the mass of people whose economic situation is, if at best, stagnant and in significant ways deteriorating, whereas a small minority are becoming very, very wealthy. And the reaction is that the Swiss have taken extraordinary steps to try to stop that. One of these proposals being that there be a guaranteed minimum wage, that every Swiss citizen be guaranteed, as a matter of citizenship, a minimum, and it was interesting, of over $30,000 a year as something you would get whether you worked or not, no matter what your job was, and so on. It was put to a referendum because I believe over 100,000 Swiss citizens signed petitions To do that, it did not succeed, but it came quite close, which means that not much less than half the people of Switzerland want that. And that doesn't exist anywhere else in Europe. That's a remarkable sign of what's happening. On the other hand, every country in Europe, because they have relatively high unemployment, because of the crisis that has hurt so many countries, the Europeans are split between countries that have done real well, like Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia, and countries that have not, like Greece or Italy or Spain. And not surprisingly, in a unified Europe, people from the poorer parts are trying to move for a better life to the parts that have done better. And this means a readjustment. The workers and the companies in the countries that have done better are not eager to share what they have done with those who haven't, even though they're all tied together. And so you see a kind of tension, and the Swiss have taken a step that is being considered in other European countries to limit that process. It does not augur well for the kind of unity that Europe has been trying, including Switzerland, to achieve.
No question about that. We're going to continue following Europe, the European Union, and the European economies, as well as Switzerland. We've been speaking with Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts, Richard Wolff. Pleasure as always having you on.
Glad to talk with you, David, anytime.